Welcome, everyone. I'm Judy Clem with Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, and I am delighted to welcome you all here this evening to talk about our first gardening event of the season. And we, as the Friends, for those of you who are not familiar with us, the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory supports the Oak Park Conservatory with volunteers and special events, education programs, and we also provide fundraising support and provide grants to the Oak Park Conservatory. The Oak Park Conservatory is actually 95 years old, believe it or not, and it is on the National Historic Registry. So it's a treasure in our community. As part of our mission, we really try to help educate and inspire gardeners to become more confident in their endeavors. And so to that end, we offer these lectures, and we are excited to have Jamie Vibach here tonight for our first program of the year. And just want to mention upcoming, we have a program happening in February on orchids. So caring for orchids is coming up. And following that in April, we will have our Learn and Grow series. And the Learn and Grow series is coming back to Oak Park Conservatory, and it will be in person the first 3 weeks of April. So watch our website for information on that. I also want to put in an announcement for our upcoming seed swap event that's happening this Sunday at Oak Park Conservatory. We have a huge selection of donated seeds from a variety of seed companies. And we also invite you to bring your own seeds to swap and trade. And we will have refreshments, and many of our committee members are on the program tonight. So you'll be able to talk with master gardeners and volunteers and get lots of great seeds to start. And we'll know what to do with them when we get out of this lecture tonight. So now I'd like to present our guests this evening, University of Illinois Extension horticulture educator, Jamie Vibach, who loves to share her knowledge and experience as a backyard gardener with others who are interested in making their surroundings a beautiful part of the local ecosystem. Jamie received her master's in environmental biology from Governor State University. She shared her love of gardening and native plants through local land trusts with residents of Will County and beyond. And now with the Illinois Extension, Jamie appreciates the opportunity to really geek out about all things plants and how we all fit together in the ecosystem. So thank you, Jamie, for joining us tonight. And also helping me host is Sue Boyer, president of Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory. So thank you, Sue, for joining me as a co-host. So welcome to Jamie.
Thank you very much.
I'm gonna pin you. And please use the chat for questions, and we'll monitor your comments and questions and get to them towards the end of the program. Thank you.
All right. And just to quickly confirm, you're seeing my screen and not my notes page, right? Perfect. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As she said, my name is Jamie Vibach. I'm a horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension. My office is based in Naperville. I'm the educator for Kane, Kendall, and DuPage counties. So appreciate the opportunity to go a little further north and say hi to our neighbors up there. So without further ado, let's talk about some winter sowing. I lied. First off, a little bit about Extension. If you're not familiar with who we are part of the university. And the way I always explain the Extension is if you think way back in the days of the mule and plow style farming, you've got all these farmers out in their fields working hard, and then you've got the university folks doing research and learning new techniques and new skills with new machinery. And they wanted to get that information out to those farmers in their fields. And so it's really hard for somebody in Champaign to reach somebody in Rockford. So they created an extension of the university. And we now have offices in every county in the state. Just about every county, I think. But we take university-based information, so research-backed information, and bring it to the people who can use it. And Now we've expanded. We are no longer just farming. We also have nutrition, gardening, parenting, food safety, ag and natural resources, economic and community development, youth leadership, food preservation. If you're familiar with 4-H, that's all the stuff that extension does. And the big part about it is it's university based. So the information I'm bringing you today is, it's some trial and error, but also it's been researched. So that's the great part, what I really appreciate about extension. So let's talk winter sowing now. What is it? It's a method of sowing seeds in containers during the winter, letting them germinate naturally outside, and then transplanting the seedlings once the ground thaws in the spring. So it's really just a quick and easy way to get some seeds germinating and growing. So how does it work? Well, the timing is really going to depend on what it is that you're growing. So the more temperate the plant's native environment, so we want to think about where do these plants come from originally, because that's going to give us a sense of what kind of weather they like to grow in. So for example, milkweed, liatris, coneflowers, all of those plants, they're native here. So we're going to start those December, January, maybe into February, because if you think about how they would operate out in nature, those seeds would mature in the fall to the ground. And if they started to germinate too soon, they'd get killed off by the cold and the snow in our winters. So that's not going to work. So they have a special seed coat on them to keep them safe and protected so they don't germinate at the wrong time. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but because we know they're native here, they go through our winters, that gives us a sense we're going to plant those earlier. Now, other cold weather veggies, hardy annuals like spinach, kale, Brussels sprouts, pansies, those can also be started. And I've got lists I can show you later. But then more originally tropical plants, things like peppers, tomatoes, those we're going to have to wait to start so that they don't get killed off by the cold. They're from much more tropical locations and they're not going to like getting too cold. So that whole process with the seed coat I was talking about, that's called stratification. So that just means something is needed to break that seed coat. So seeds have a coating around them that helps to protect them from the elements. And in the case of many native plants, that seed coat is really tough. So it's going to take a lot to get in there. And so if you think of like the concrete in your driveway, though, that with water gets in there and it freezes, that's going to cause cracks in your concrete, right? Same thing with the seed coat. It's going to help to crack that open, that repeated series of freezes and thaws. It's going to crack that seed coat open and the stuff inside can come out. It can germinate. So you'll hear that referred to as stratification. Scarification is another method of this. You see that the first part of that scar, you're scarring the seed coat. You're going to use something like sandpaper to break it open. That's another method. Again, it's all going to be determined by what plant it is you're trying to grow. So why do we winter sow instead of, maybe going to the nursery and buying plants or just throwing our seeds in the ground? Well, for one thing, you're going to save money. If you look at that picture there on the right, see all those seedlings there? If you were going to buy those at a nursery, each one of those seedlings would be probably somewhere between $3 and $5. That right there is probably less than $3 worth of seed. So for, say, $3, you're going to get 30 plants. You've just saved yourself a whole boatload of money right there. You can also start your plants faster, right? They're going to get a head start on what's going on, and you can get a better selection of rarer plants. Nurseries are going to grow what's most popular, what they're going to be able to sell. They're not going to grow the weird stuff or the less common, unusual, heirloom, what have you. So, but a lot of times you can still find those seeds. So if you can get a hold of those seeds, you can start them yourself. It's also a whole lot less work. If you've ever tried starting your seeds indoors, you know all the effort that has to go into it. And, here we're just going to throw our seeds in some dirt and put them in some pots outside and just let nature do its work. So you don't have to be monitoring them and keeping an eye on them so much. You also don't have to worry about damping off, which is a bacterial infection that many seedlings can get if there's not enough airflow on there. You also don't have to worry about hardening off. Again, if you've started your own seeds before, you remember having to take that whole tray outside and then bring it back in, and then take it back outside again the next day and then bring it back in. You don't have to do any of that. It naturally hardens them off on their own. And it also naturally stratifies the seeds. You'll see a lot of discussion about seed stratification, doing it in the refrigerator. I will tell you from experience, I tried doing that, and 60 days later, guess what happened? I completely forgot about them, and the seeds stayed in the refrigerator for probably another 15 or 20 days because I completely forgot about them. And then when I finally remembered, I had no time to work with them. And so this way, again, it's doing it all on its own, all by itself, without you having to think too much about it. So again, we've talked about some of the comparisons here with indoor seed starting. Again, it's time consuming. It takes up lots of space. If you have, a small living space, maybe you just don't have room for it. You don't have the specialty equipment like the lights and the fans and all this and that and the other thing. It's a lot, right? And then, as we mentioned, with the damping off, it can encourage insects and disease while you end up with weak, spindly transplants. Now, direct seeding outside is another way you can do it. Again, native plants, they're used to growing outside, so why not just take those seeds and throw them in the ground outside in the fall and let them do their thing? The number one reason is critters. I, again, have tried doing this, and I get such low germination rates because I know the chipmunks in my yard are getting many of them. The birds are getting many of them. And if you get a heavy rain event, who knows where those seeds are going to end up, right? They're going to get washed off down. I've had things pop up in weird places before. Like, how did you get there? Who knows? Animal moved it or rains moved it. But doing our winter sowing is much more controlled, but we're harnessing the power of nature to do it for us. All right. What's our timing in all of this? So I've started this calendar here in January, but I'm going to be honest, you can really start it in December with some things. So especially a lot of our natives, a lot of people say to sow natives right around the winter solstice. So that's going to be right around December 21st, 22nd. That's also a good time to start, but a lot's going to depend on your plants. And you're going to know this by reading your seed packet. We'll talk more about seed packets in a bit, but your seed packet will tell you how many days it needs to stratify. So we know that our average frost date is May 15th. So you're going to take a look at when you want these things to go in the ground, how close to that frost date you want, or at what point in time you want to plant them, and then back up that many days. So in the case of something that says it takes 30 days of cold moist stratification, if it's a native, we can generally plant it right around May 15th, maybe a little sooner, but we would back up 1 month and know that we needed to start these things at least by mid-April, probably sooner. If it needs, some things I've seen need 120 days, that's 4 months. So then now we're getting back into, definitely starting those in December. So, and again, this is weather. We can't predict it. Nothing is a guarantee. So if something needs 30 days of being really cold, if you start that in April, there's a pretty good chance it's not going to be really cold by then. So again, we want to make sure we're backing this up to the point where, what needs to happen has time to happen. So January is a great time for natives. There are some other perennials, hardy annuals, hardy vegetables, hardy herbs. You see that word hardy in there. That means it can withstand a light frost. So think of, your kales and, cruciferous kinds of things. Those are generally pretty good with some frost. Your lettuces, they like really cold weather too. So, those hardy kinds of things you can start early. Into February, natives, I would say natives, you're getting even a little bit late there if you're not starting them until February. Again, more of your hardy things. By the time we get to March, now we can start thinking more about our tender annuals and our tender vegetables. These are things that absolutely cannot handle any frost at all. So again, your peppers, your tomatoes, things like that. So, and then April, that's now we're getting into your warm weather vegetables too, carrots, things like that. So again, your seed packet will give you lots of information on there too. So some examples for January and February here, we've got, great natives like Liatris, Baptisia, coneflowers, milkweed, Joe Pye, right? All your favorite natives right there, along with some perennials like lupin and flax, Shasta daisy, clematis, and then, hardy annuals, hardy vegetables like we talked about are cruciferous, spinach, cabbage, cauliflower, Swiss chard, broccoli, kale. By the way, I'm sure as gardeners, you probably all know this, but that's all the same plant. Kale, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, all the same plant. It just kills me every time. And Brussels sprouts also fits in there too. They're all considered cruciferous type vegetables, but technically they're the same plant. They've just selected for different parts of the plant to be bigger and better. If it's cabbage, it's the leaves that were meant to be bigger. If it's Brussels sprouts, it's those side axils. If it's broccoli, it's the flower part. Crazy. It's crazy gardeners, I'm telling you. It's awesome. But then we can also start some hardy herbs like lavender and oregano and sage. So we got a lot of good stuff going on here. Now, by the time we're getting to March, we can get more into the tender things, the things that can't handle frost so much. So your zinnias, marigolds, nasturtiums, your lettuces, lettuce can kind of go either way if you have a little greenhouse over it, which is essentially what winter sowing is. You can maybe have them outside a little bit earlier, but and then your basil and rosemary. So these are, again, some things that the frost can hurt. So you want to make sure you're waiting until the danger of frost has passed. Or not passed, but until it gets later. So as they come up, they won't be as bothered by frost. And then April, again, like I said, these are some more of your tropical things here. Tomatoes, beans, eggplants, pumpkins, while maybe not tropical, they do tend to come up later. So peppers, I know peppers can be iffy. Peppers really like it warm. And, for years, I always planted my tomatoes and my peppers at the same time. And I had beautiful tomatoes. And then I just watched my peppers just really languish. And I could never figure out what the problem was. And then I realized I'm putting them in too early. You don't plant them the same time. So peppers, you probably want to wait. Or, that's one you may even want to start inside or at least make sure you can take care of if it's going to get too cool. All right, let's look at some of the supplies that we need for winter sowing. So the three main things you need are potting soil, some kind of recycled container to put it in, and seeds, right? Everything else, as they say, is gravy. So optional stuff that you can have, some kind of waterproof marker, paint pen, twist ties, twine, packing tape, something to close them up with, scissors or a box cutter, something to cut with, and then something to poke holes with. So the right container is going to give you the best results, and the wrong container can end in disaster. So we'll talk more about containers here in just a minute, but you also want to make sure that you've got the correct soil type. It's really important to have potting soil. And then some seeds are better than others for winter sowing in our area. So we'll get more into detail on this in a minute. But yeah, so moving along. So your choice of container is really important. We always talk about using some kind of recycled container because, better for the environment rather than going out and buying a whole new kit. Like, don't do that. Milk jugs are super easy to come by, even if you don't have a milk drinker in the house. Bottles of juice, water, the big gallon-sized water bottles, vinegar bottles, and even if you can't come up with the milk jugs, I guarantee if you ask on Facebook and some neighborhood page, that's what I did. And some lady gave me like 3 lawn and leaf bags full of 1 gallon water jugs. I don't know why she had them all, but she did, and she gave them to me, and they worked beautifully. Go to Starbucks or any coffee shop, right? They go through tons of milk. If you ask them to save you containers, a lot of times they will. So there's lots of ways that you can beg, borrow, or steal these kinds of, don't steal them, but you can get these kinds of containers, something that will work, right? So you want them to be translucent or clear. So you want to, if you put your hand behind it, you want to be able to see it. Deep enough to hold about 4 inches of soil and tall enough to provide about 4 inches of headroom. Although with some natives, that's doesn't even need to be that much. So, but depending on what it is that you're growing, you know, this will fit the bill. So examples of containers here, we've got the juice container, right? My son was more of a juice drinker than a milk drinker. So we had lots of these clear plastic juice containers. Produce containers are great, like the strawberries you see in the top there. The mixed lettuce containers that you get from the store, those are great. The drink cups, I mean, kind of an exaggeration. They're a little small, but hey, you can make them work. And you can see in that example down there at the bottom, you know, we got all kinds of containers down there. A lot of those are like reused nursery containers. They have that plastic top on them. You know, nice small size for you know, more individual type things. But you know, you got your milk jugs going on there too, right? It would everything. You can use just about everything, right? So, like I said, those plastic produce clamshells are great. Even though they may not have that 4 inches of headroom, the natives don't mind too much. And you're already taking the top off by the time they're getting that big anyway. So they'll be fine. So again, milk and water jugs, juice bottles, careful with the soda containers. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but foil roasting pans, also another great option. Takeout containers, right? So I hope you're kind of getting the impression here that you can use just about anything. If you're short on space, rectangular or square containers can help with that. This is why you want to avoid the 2-liter soda bottles if they taper at the bottom, because your seedlings and your soil kind of get stuck in that narrow part there. And smaller containers will dry out quickly. Dry soil means dead seeds. So if you do use small containers, make sure you're checking them frequently to make sure they are staying wet enough. Obviously, you want to avoid any containers that held chemicals or caustic liquids, cleaning products, stuff like that. Probably don't want to use those. You can rinse them really well, but you can never really be too sure that you got everything out of it. And then if you use anything that's made of compostable material, that new like corn plastic stuff that they have, that you might run into an issue with that disintegrating outside. So unfortunately, this is one of those cases where reusing something plastic is going to be a good bet. Now let's move on to potting soil. You want something that's going to be light, fluffy, and well draining. So we don't want to drown our seeds, but we want to make sure they stay nice and wet. So you can use a soilless mix if you have one of those, or pasteurized potting soil. And you'll want to use the highest quality really that you can find and afford. Just a note, just because it's expensive doesn't mean it's good quality. So just make sure what you're getting is a good quality potting soil. You want to avoid seed starting mixes, right? Seems a little antithetical there, but they don't generally have enough nutrients in them for what we're trying to do. So our seeds are going to be taking in a whole bunch of nutrients. They're going to be in there for a long time. So stay away from those. Garden soil is really heavy. And so you're not going to get good air circulation in there. Can also have disease and weed seeds in there. The last thing you want to do is plant a bunch of nice seeds, and then next thing you know, you got a bunch of dandelions cropping up in it. Topsoil, same issues as garden soil. A lot of the mixes nowadays have water crystals in them that are supposed to like help it retain water. And we really don't want to do that, because in this case here, that could potentially lead to rotting your seeds or root rot, things like that. We don't want it. We want it to stay moist, but these keep it too wet. So homemade compost is great out in the garden. but you really run the risk of getting microbes, bacteria in there, not to mention seeds. I have never put my home compost anywhere that I haven't ended up with 30 new tomato seedlings. So keep the compost in the garden. And then succulent or cactus potting soil, it's too porous, it's too well draining, and it's not going to keep your seeds wet enough. So again, potting soil, potting soil, potting soil, that's what you want. And remember, for your seeds, we've talked about lots of things with flowers, but you can do more than just natives or flowering things. Trees, I've seen a lot of people start oak trees with acorns that way. Shrubs, perennials, herbs, vegetables, annuals. Really, there's a lot of things you can start. I'm not going to say you can start everything, but take a look at your seed packet for clues that these seeds would be good to winter sow. So these are some of the phrases you might see on your seed packet. So it might come right out and say stratification is required, or sometimes they abbreviate it as CMS, cold moist stratification. So you might see CMS 30, which would mean it needs 30 days of cold moist stratification. It might say the seeds are hardy or early winter, can withstand frost, right? All these terms tell us you can start them in the winter. Plant outdoors in the fall is a great one. You see that on a lot of natives too. As soon as soil can be worked in the spring, again, all clues that they can handle some cold. And I love looking at the binomials too, or sometimes even the common names, because they can sometimes give you a clue. If you have something that has as part of the binomial that two-word scientific name, if it has the word canadensis in it, you can pretty much guess it was originally identified in Canada. Canada gets cold. Ergo, you can probably winter sow it. Again, same with Siberian, polar, Oriental, you might see. And again, all of these, things tell you they'll probably work. Okay, so here's some things you might see on seed packets, right? Examples of seed packets here. So you can see at the top, direct seed outdoors as soon as soil can be worked in spring, right? Again, that's our key word that tells us that it's early. Or that middle one there, that looks like something from Prairie Moon. Remember that C120? If you've ever ordered anything from Prairie Moon, they have germination codes, and they'll give you a whole list. It's like A through G of all different ways of starting seeds, and they'll tell you what the best way for those seeds are. And if it's a C, that means stratification. And so C120 tells you it's going to need 120 days of stratification. Again, or the one on the bottom, early winter, storage period in the refrigerator. Again, those are all clues. And also, I have to say too, wait, I'm going to go back here. Save your seed packets. How many times have you gone to make macaroni and cheese and you throw the box in the garbage, and then you have to go dig the box out of the garbage because you forgot how much milk you got to put back in it, right? Yeah, I've never done that before, ever. Of course, everybody does that. Seed packets are the same way. Don't throw away your seed packet because you're going to want that information on there later. Save your seed packets. Okay, where do you get your seeds from? Loads of places. I hear there's a seed swap coming up on Sunday. How about that? So, seed swaps, as I mentioned, our offices are having seed swaps. The Morton Arboretum has a seed swap. Chicago Botanic Garden has a seed swap. All kinds of great seed swaps. Retail garden centers, big box dollar stores. Again, depending on the kind of seed you're looking for, you may want to get picky. But I will say, if you're going on the internet, find a reputable seed company. If you are not familiar with the reputable seed companies, Google the company name and reviews. Look for, people saying things like nothing germinated or got something completely different than what I ordered. You see that kind of stuff on Amazon all the time. I don't order seeds from Amazon. I've just heard too many horror stories about people getting weird or unknown, or who knows what they got. So again, look for reputable seed companies if you're going to order from them. Any of the old timey ones that had catalogs, right? That's a company with history behind it. And you can also save your own in the fall. Illinois Extension has some seed saving webinars that you can watch on YouTube. The Field Museum has a field guide to saving seeds. I will just say that if you're going to collect seeds, only collect from places where you have explicit permission from the landowner, like, for example, your own yard. So, saving seeds from plants you grew last year, great. Caveat on that, though, in just a minute. So it is illegal to collect from a forest preserve. So, or any property you don't own. I know people who like to go find milkweed seeds on the side of the road. Oh, okay. But, don't go collecting seeds from other people's property. Technically, it's considered poaching. There's a huge fine associated with it if you get caught. So this is my plug. Do not collect from forest preserves. So, talk to somebody who's got great plants that you like, give them some compliments, bake them some cookies. I'm sure they would be more than happy to share some seeds with you. So I mentioned saving things that you grew. So if you are growing edible things, vegetables, herbs, hybrid plants may not produce what you expect. Hybrids are this really interesting thing where, just like human children, you take mom, you take dad, and the kid is not a clone of one or the other. It's kind of a mix of both. So plants are the same way. So unless you know for a fact that you are only growing one specific type of tomato, and nobody else within about a half mile is growing anything resembling a tomato, you can never be quite sure what you're going to get out on the other side of it. I like to play this fun game where usually in my compost pile, I end up with a random cucurbit. I can't tell exactly what it is other than it's something in the cucurbit family. And I will let it grow every year and just see what I end up with. I've ended up with some interesting things. I got something that looked like a butternut squash one year. Did not taste like it. I got something that looked like a little softball-sized cantaloupe one time. That was interesting. But what happens are these families, they can cross-pollinate. That doesn't impact the fruit of the thing that you planted. It affects the next generation. So let's say I plant a beautiful heirloom tomato and I find 3 more different heirloom tomatoes that I really like, and I want to grow those too. So I put all of those plants out in my garden, and then I say, I'm going to save seeds for next year. I get my beautiful heirloom tomatoes. I eat them. They're delicious. I save some seeds. I go to plant them next year, and it's like, wait, these don't look anything like the beautiful heirloom tomatoes that I took them from. What happened? Well, bugs, pollination. Pollination happened. And things can cross. Obviously, tomatoes are the same species, even if they're different types. But those lovely cucurbits, they like to get around. So if you grow zucchini and yellow crookneck squash or pumpkins, those can all hybridize. So the pollen from one ends up on the flower of the other. And what are you getting when you try to grow those seeds? Some weird Frankensquash. So who knows? Cantaloupe and honeydew can cross. And like I mentioned, they can cross-pollinate if they're within a half mile of each other. So it doesn't even necessarily matter what you're growing in your yard. What's your neighbor growing? What's their neighbor growing? So you never quite know where this pollen is coming from, because these bugs, they really get around and they do their job pollinating, and they don't really care where they're getting the pollen from. So if you truly want to save seeds, the only way to do this is before the flower opens, you get yourself a little paintbrush and you wiggle it around inside the flower, and then you put a bag, some kind of like a mesh bag, you tie around that flower. It's about the only way to make sure an insect isn't going to get in there. So that's the only way if you're, worried about hybrids and stuff like that. So like I said, the squashes can be kind of weird because those inedible gourds can cross with your zucchini and your other squashes, and the resulting product is not good. So that's my little mini lecture on hybrids. All right, so other tools that you might want to have: a hole punch. and we'll talk about how you use that hole punch in a bit. A sharp object for punching drainage holes. This can be a screwdriver, an ice pick. I've seen people use soldering irons to get nice and hot. And so you got a plastic container and you just poke it right through and it goes very easily right through there. Again, as it's like a Phillips head screwdriver, if you're going to use something like that, I advise heating it over a flame. Again, that'll help you melt the plastic as you're going through it. It'll just make getting through it a lot easier. You could use some twist ties and twine again for tying it closed later. A weatherproof marker or a paint pen. These are really important for labeling later. And then you want something to cut open your container, so scissors or a box cutter. And then you might also want some kind of a tablecloth, a cutting board, rulers, rubber bands. There's lots of other stuff, and we'll talk about how you use those when we get to the construction phase. All right, so we're going to get into the meat of it here. So we're going to prepare our container. So you got your milk jug, your water jug, whatever it is you're going to use. You're going to want to get rid of the cap, rinse it out really good, and remove any labels or stickers. If you can, don't drive yourself crazy with it. It's not that big a deal. But an easy way to get those stickers off if you're having trouble, if they're the paper kind of stickers, wet washcloth, leave it on top for a good 20 minutes or so, and that paper label should just peel right off. Then you're going to cut it in half. Now, I will say there are probably 100 different ways to do this, and 95 of them will work. So I'm going to give you a couple of different options of how to do it. You just pick your favorite. So the way I did it, as you can see with my water jug here, I took my water jug and I cut it almost in half. I left about 2 to 3 inches on the side there, right by the handle for a hinge. Same with the milk jug there on the right. I have also heard recently from somebody actually just today was telling me they made a like a door in theirs. So they cut out sort of a U shape just opposite the handle so that they could just take that flap, lift it up, do everything they needed in there, and then the flap would go down. A lot of people complain that it's once you cut them, they're not as structurally sound. And I experienced this with my water bottles. They were a little harder to maneuver, especially once they start getting heavy. So, you know, leaving most of it intact and just cutting that little like door, garage door, like in it, might be helpful. So again, lots of ways to do this. Then you're going to cut some drainage holes. As my family says, safety third. No, actually safety first. We want to be nice and careful when we're cutting our drainage holes in there. Again, as we mentioned, use your soldering iron, a heated screwdriver, something to poke some holes in the bottom. If you're poking in the bottom, it's easier to go from the bottom to the outside. Again, you know, pushing through your container towards the outside helps to prevent it collapsing inside on itself. You're going to want to cut several larger holes, 6 to 12, depends on the size of your container, just kind of space them out. The goal is you want something that's about, I would say, a pencil diameter that lets the water drain out. If it's any smaller than that, you kind of risk getting it clogged sometimes. If it's too big, you're going to get too much water leaking out. So aim for about pencil size, just a handful of holes. And then you're going to cut some ventilation holes in the top, only if you're using flat top containers. If you're using a milk jug or something like that, it's already got the big hole in the top and you're probably fine. If you're not, you can also punch some holes around the top edge of it, up to you. Now, labeling containers. This is really, really important. So you're going to want to label the container with the date and the type of seed planted. Again, lots of different ways to do this. Pick your favorite. I experimented with a paint pen, with nail polish. I had a silver Sharpie just for fun, but permanent markers are notoriously not, especially when you put them out in the sun. So I would stay away from the Sharpie, the permanent marker, unless you're going to put something over it. So you'll see I had a label maker. So, you know, went a little nuts with my label maker and then put some packing tape over the outside of that too to help keep it on. And that worked really well. I was surprised it actually stayed on pretty well. Again, paint pens, you can get them at the craft store. Those work really well too. So wax pencils, that's another option if you've got a wax pencil laying around. You can also put your label inside the container. I actually took my seed packet and kind of folded it in half and stuck it inside. I don't really recommend doing that. My label was kind of a mess by the time everything was done and I could barely read it. But you can write on a popsicle stick and stick that inside too. That works. But really you want to make sure you label them well, because you don't want to come to spring and be like, wait, what did I plant in there again? And have your permanent marker all worn away, and then you have no idea what you did. All right, so now we're going to put the soil in. I highly recommend that you pre-moisten the soil, because that way you can really get your mixture right. If you add a little too much water, not a big deal, just put some more soil in there too. And so you can make sure you get it just right before you put it into your containers. So you want it to drain well, and it should have a moisture kind of like a damp sponge. If you pick up a handful of it, you don't really want it to be sopping and dripping, but you want it to be nice and wet. So then you're going to add 3 to 4 inches of soil to the bottom part of your container. You should have about a ½ inch to an inch before the top of where your cut is. So, one note I forgot to mention, to help mark my line of where to cut, I used a rubber band. And so I put a rubber band around the container, measured it just right so I could get where I wanted, and then traced around that. And that way I could make sure that I positioned my hinge where I wanted it to. And so I made sure to mark it first before I cut. Just a little tip there. So anyway, so you've got your pre-moistened soil. You're going to add about 3 to 4 inches to your container. Then you're going to add your seeds. So this is where your seed packet's going to come in handy. So pull your seed packet out of the garbage again, because you got to read it. And it'll tell you how deep to plant. Average depth is about twice the seed's diameter, but some seeds require light to germinate. So if they're not sitting right on the surface, they're not going to germinate. And you're not going to know that if you don't read the seed packet. In this case, this seed packet says plant no deeper than the width of the seed. So you're going to look at your seed, you're going to kind of eyeball it and then put it in that far. This is not critical, right? If you are 1/8 of an inch off, does that mean your seed's not going to germinate? No. If you're 1 inch off, maybe. So, just try to estimate. And sow a few more seeds than you think you're going to need. So if you really want 5 plants, I would put in at least 10 seeds. Especially if they're smaller seeds, I might put in a few more. And then press them in, because you want to have really good seed to soil contact. In some cases, you can, put them in and then sprinkle fresh soil over the top and then mist them. That's another option as well. So again, we said sow them about twice as deep as they are wide. In the case of foxgloves, those seeds are dust size. They are tiny, tiny. And so basically you just want to sprinkle them on and just sort of pat them into the surface. Marigolds are a ½ inch long, but they're narrow and flat. So again, those are going to go just under the surface. Then you get your peas or corn. They're about a 1/4 inch across. So they're going to go a ½ inch deep. So again, you don't have to be exact, but try to approximate. You can moisten the soil after you've planted. However, if you just run a stream of water in there, it's going to slosh your seeds around and they're going to go everywhere. And then you're going to have all your seeds at the edges of your container and nothing growing in the middle. And that's not going to be good for anybody. So if you want to wet them after planting, I advise using a spray bottle. That can help prevent this. And as you water them while they're germinating, you're going to want to run the water down the inside of the jug or your container. So rather than just sprinkling it over the top, you'll want to just kind of dribble it down the sides. All right, now we're going to secure the sides. Again, 100 ways to do it, 95% probably work great. I used packing tape and nobody was more surprised than me that it actually worked. I did not think that was going to stay stuck on there. Your mileage may vary. But it did. You can see my funky packing tape there in all the multicolors. It worked. It kept them secure as they needed. Some people have struggled with that. And so you can see on the right there, this is where your hole punch comes in. They punched some holes in it and then used twist ties to secure them together. Very secure way to do it. It's great. Again, if you cut the garage door style, that flap style that we talked about earlier, you won't even have to worry about this because that flap will just fall right back into place and you'll be good. Now you're going to place your containers outside. So you're going to want to choose a protected area that gets about a half day sun. And it's going to be safe from strong winds, pets, people. Basically, you don't want anybody knocking them over or messing with them. And will allow snow and rain in. So you could see I had mine on the deck, an uncovered porch, a flower bed against a fence, whatever kind of space you have, just not under the eaves of your house. So those eaves will protect it a little too much and it won't get the snow and the rain that it needs. And it, can also prevent it from getting enough sunlight as well. So just make sure wherever you're putting them, they're kind of out in the open, but also where, nothing's going to mess with them. They're going to be safe from wind, that kind of thing. And also, another note about critters too. Again, you want to make sure they're protected. I've seen people use things like chicken wire or hardware cloth over the top. If you think you might have an issue with raccoons or squirrels or somebody digging around in there, because believe you me, squirrels will definitely dig in them. So having something that makes it a little more difficult for them works. And then I also recommend keeping a journal. That saves you work trying to remember what worked and what didn't. So it's often very hard to remember in the spring. Wait, what was in that? When did I plant this again? And especially, next winter when you're trying to do this again. Wait, did I plant my lettuce in February or March? And did it work? So keep those kinds of notes so that you don't have to guess year after year. Learn. That is, what is it? The difference between science and screwing around is writing it down. I heard that quote once from the guys from Mythbusters, and I loved it. So, all right, now we have our containers all right. We've got them in their space. Now we just let them go. We're just going to let them sit out there. And we're going to keep an eye on them periodically. You can see those are mine on the deck there on the left. I did those last winter. They got snowed on. They were very happy out there. And the nice thing about having them up so close to the house is every time I go to let my dog out, I could look out there and I'm checking on them. So you want condensation. Obviously if there's snow on there, it doesn't really matter. But as the temperatures warm up, you're going to want to keep an eye out for condensation. That tells you that there's enough moisture in the container. They're not drying out too much. If you suddenly start to see the inside looks dry, definitely go take a look and maybe give them some extra water. And then as the temperatures warm up, you might need to periodically move them to a little more shade just so they don't get crispy. And then if there's no condensation, if it's sunny, if it's above 32 degrees, you'll want to drip water in slowly down the sides. So again, don't get out the watering can and just, sprinkle over the top of them. You want to make sure you're dripping it down the side so you're not splashing your seeds around everywhere. And very soon you will have freezing and thawing, and that's good. That's what we want. And your herbs, your natives, and your cold hardy vegetables, they're going to come up first. So, keep an eye on them again as it starts to warm up. I know we all get very anxious about what's happening in there. It's okay. Have patience. Check for moisture. Again, whenever it's sunny, warm, and windy. If you see the condensation on the top, you're good. On really warm days, you're going to want to open it up. Let them get the full sun. Let them get that airflow in there. Basically, when the daytime temperatures are over 40, you're going to want to make sure they have enough moisture in there. When it gets into that 50 to 60 degree range, open that top for a little bit, give them some fresh air. But then you're also going to want to close them up at night. So the temperatures in the spring will still drop, So you want to make sure you're closing them up again. And just know that the temperatures inside your container, they might be 20 degrees warmer than outside. So that's that greenhouse effect that we've got going on here, is by having that shelter, that plastic over the top, that's helping to hold in that solar radiation. That's going to keep them nice and warm in there. Once your seedlings have outgrown your containers, then you can completely remove the top or just keep them open all the time. All right, so now we've got our plants and it's maybe time to transplant them. This is also a good time, by the way, to take a look at your seedlings and make sure you know what the seedlings of what you're trying to grow actually look like. So, you know, I have on more than one occasion had some interlopers show up in my seeds, and you know, they weren't what I actually planted. So transplant when the ground thaws. You want about 2 sets of true leaves, or they're about 2 inches tall. Remember, those first 2 leaves that come up, those are your cotyledons. Those are your seed leaves. They're not true leaves yet. They are just the inside of the seed, essentially. So you want to make sure until the next set of leaves, those are the true leaves. And when conditions are right. What does right mean? Depends on the plant. So again, things that like it a little bit warmer, you might want to wait to put them in the ground until it gets a little warmer. Things like lettuces, you know, they can go in the ground pretty early. And quite honestly, you can wait until you're ready to do it. Make sure you get your beds prepared, because don't even touch those seedlings until you have the spot you're going to put them, right? I let the spring get away from me this past year, and I had stuff in one of my containers until probably July. And you know what? They were okay. They were a little stunted, but they were fine. And I finally got around to getting a spot for them and put them in the ground, and they were fine. So make sure you've got the spot ready for them before. So how do we get them out of here? So think about this kind of like a pan of brownies. You got a delicious pan of brownies in front of you. You take your little plastic knife maybe, and you just kind of make cuts in the top, and you just cut them into little squares. That's your hunk of seedlings. So just cut, you can make cuts right through the soil, kind of tease the leaves apart maybe so you're not cutting the plants. But you know, if you look at the one on the left there, there's a whole lot of seedlings going on in there. So you can just cut out chunks of that, scoop it out, put it in the ground, let them get situated, then start to worry about thinning, right? And remember, when you thin, you don't pull them out, you pinch them off at the soil so you don't disturb all the roots. The one on the right, they're not quite so dense in there. You may be able to tease them apart and pull out one at a time. And from here, if you wanted to put them into seedling trays to raise them up a little bit more before it's time to go in the ground, you can totally do that, right? That's another way to get them a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger before you actually put them in the ground. And remember, they're going to be small, right? These are still little bitty seedlings. So make sure they stay watered. Make sure you don't forget about them. So quick troubleshooting. I know I'm going a little long here. I do that. But some troubleshooting here. If your seeds are sprouting really early, if it's a warm spring, they're gonna. That's just what happens. Again, we can't predict the weather. We can't control the weather as much as I wish I could sometimes. That's just what happens. And then if only some of the seeds are sprouting, again, this is normal. Some seeds just take longer to grow than others. You know, maybe one was an inch away from the other one and had slightly less than optimal conditions. Who knows? It happens. And not every seed germinates. That's why we plant extra seeds, so that we get the right amount. And if we get extras at the end, hey, bonus, but we want to make sure we get enough. If there's no condensation on there, you might have too many ventilation holes, or they're too large. You can tape over some of the holes or secure a plastic bag over the top. That'll help prevent that moisture loss as well. If your soil is soupy or muddy, or you've got standing water in the container, then you've got bad drainage. So your holes aren't big enough, so widen your holes a little bit or add a few more holes. Lift the container up. Sometimes I find if it's sitting on, like I've got Trex decking, and I think the hole's kind of sealed against that decking. It didn't have a way to drain out of there. So you might have to prop them up a little bit so they can drain better, or put them on something porous so that the excess water is going to drain. You've got green stuff growing on the surface, that's algae. That tells you that your soil is too wet, or there isn't enough sun, or the air is too moist, or some combination of all three of those things. So give the containers more sun, a little less water, open them up, get some airflow going in there. You can scrape that algae layer off the surface if you can, or don't, whatever, it's fine. If the container is really, really light, then it's dried up. So you want to make sure you water it really good. So imagine the possibilities. Take a look. All these things that have been winter sown, isn't that beautiful? Everything from our veggies to our natives. We got all kinds of great stuff growing in there. Dianthus, phlox, and lupins. I will say if you're going to grow lupins, make sure you get the ones that are, well, they're questionably native in this area, but there's a really non-native one that can be borderline invasive. So make sure you're getting the right one if you're going to grow lupins. Zinnia coneflower, prairie smoke is one of my favorite natives. Oh, they're so gorgeous. They come up in the spring and they just look like those little cotton candy tufts on there. They're gorgeous. Love it. Bottle gentian's another one of my favorites too. Just like, I like the weird flowers, as you can probably tell. So, bottle gentian's another one of my favorite, that little weird flower. And then the bees that get in there, they got to really work hard, and they get in there and you just see them buzzing around in there, and then they just fall asleep, and it's the cutest thing. And columbine too. I love columbine because you never know where the columbine is going to pop up. They like to migrate beds. I think critters probably move the seeds around, but you'll have one in one bed and they don't take over anything. They don't hurt anything. If you don't like it there, pull it. It'll be gone next year. But yeah, they're another one of my favorites. Pansies. Imagine if you were to buy a planter of pansies like that at the nursery, that's going to run you upwards of $30-$40 probably. You can grow all those from $3 worth of seed. And can there really be too much of a good thing? I don't know. Look at that. That's a lot of potential right there. That's a lot of potential. So we have a few resources for you here. Just some websites. University of Illinois Extension. That first part there is our website. We've got all kinds of great information on gardening for you there. Trudy Davidoff, I didn't mention her before, but she's the one who really pioneered this concept of winter sowing. And it was really because she had a small house and she wanted to grow stuff. And so she came up with this method and it worked. And she's done a lot of work to hone the technique over the years. So she's got a website up there with lots of great stuff on it. And that's me. And that's your Master Gardener Help Desk. If you have questions, you can send any gardening questions to your Master Gardener Help Desk and they will answer them for you. And then you can also visit the Facebook page. And again, your Cook County specific one is that www.extension.uiuc.edu/cook. But our state page also has all kinds of great stuff in there. There's lots of blogs and there's YouTube videos. However you like to learn, we have content for you. So with that, I can take a few questions here.
Thank you so much. That was amazing, and really detailed pictures to go with everything that you were sharing. So Jamie, thank you so much for putting together this presentation. I'm going to quickly flip through some of the questions here. Our first one was about the type of raised bed that would be recommended. So not necessarily a winter sowing question, but they're asking, would you recommend a galvanized bin or a pine wood pre-assembled bed? Is there something to be aware of when starting the garden in terms of the garden bed? Any recommendations?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of information, a lot of studies done about this, and I was actually reading all about this recently because I was putting together another presentation. And the good news is a lot of the pressure treated lumber that had the bad stuff in it, the arsenic and like all that kind of nasty stuff, they've gotten rid of a lot of that. So a lot of that is not used as much anymore. But they also did a study where they took treated lumber and they built a bed out of it and they took measurements in the soil and they found that the if anything leached out of the wood, it didn't really go much more than about an inch away from the edge.
Mm,
So if you're concerned about that, it's really not an issue.
mhm,
So, but again, also if you're concerned about it, there's plenty of other things that you can look for as well. When you look at the lumber, there are codes on it, and I can't remember them off the top of my head, but there are codes in it that tell you how it was treated.
okay.
So that is definitely a great thing to research, and there is information out there about it if you're concerned about that. The galvanized steel, that's a really popular one, and I'll tell you in my own yard, I'm going to be putting some of those in
Mhm,
this next year. I had to redo all my garden beds because they were all falling apart. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of like really nice options with corrugated steel in there
mhm.
too. So um, just, you know, be aware with how you prepare the bed, what you put under it, make sure, you want to be in contact with the native soil and, not have a bottom on your garden bed, that kind of thing. So
Yeah, it's really a whole separate lecture.
it
So
is,
I'll
it
keep us
is.
moving. We do have setting up your garden for success as one of our learn and grows coming in early April. So we do actually talk about we've got a farmer coming in to talk to us about how to prepare our gardens for success. So we'll kind of get into that more in the future. Okay, so what brand of potting soil would you recommend? Is there a particular brand that's more successful that you could share with us?
So university rules say I cannot recommend brands.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Okay.
Um, but I will say, look at the components, look at what's in it,
Okay.
and that will help you to make the decision for yourself. There's tons of different brands out there, and they're all great. Well, maybe not all of them, but many of them are great.
Mhm.
Just again, you want to make sure that it's going to have the nutrients in there that it's going to need, and not have to worry about the weed seeds and
Mhm.
that kind of thing.
Right. And so, and you said earlier, remember, we're looking for potting soil,
Potting soil.
seed starting soil. So please be aware of that when you're purchasing your soil. Emily had a question about can peppers hybridize? I think you were saying that they can.
They
She
can.
grew some seeds from peppers that she grew last year. So,
Yes, they can. And so, this might be especially noticeable if you say grew some hot peppers in addition to some bell peppers.
mhm,
You may end up with bell peppers with a bite.
mhm.
It can be hard to say, but grow them. Why
Yeah,
not?
give it a try.
You never know what you're going to end up. They might be great. Who knows?
Okay, this is an interesting question from Rex. Can we stop early germination because of the unseasonably warm weather that by leaving the seeds shaded?
So that's a great question, and I would say probably not. So generally, once that germination train starts going, there is no stopping it. Um, and nor do you really want to, right? Nature has said this is the time. Let's get going. If something is, if there's going to be a cold snap or something like that, um, you can put a blanket around them. Um, you know, cover your seedlings with a blanket. That can generally help because you're not going to have a hard frost generally after May 15th. So, you might get a light frost, but you're not going to get like a really hard one. So
Mhm.
covering them with something that can help if you're really concerned, like if there is going to be a massive cold snap, bring them in for the night. There you can protect them that way. But generally once it gets started, you're not going to stop it.
Yeah, it's nature taking its course.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see. Any recommendations on local stores to purchase seeds? I think you gave us a bunch of recommendations on where to get seeds in your presentation. Seed swap happening this weekend at Oak Park Conservatory. That is
Yeah.
a free event where we have hundreds of seed packets from reputable seed suppliers that were donated to us, and we are trading and swapping and taking the seeds that we need. The conservatory also has a seed sale going on with some very beautiful seed packets. I can't remember the brand name again, but there are these gorgeous hand painted seed packets. And so just garden centers and, reputable sources versus like a Amazon kind of thing is a safe place to get some good seeds. Anything
Yeah.
else to add, Jamie?
No, that's great. I mean, you can get seeds anywhere. Our dollar store seeds going to be any worse than seeds you got at a bougie nursery? Probably not. I mean, it depends on what you're going for, though. I am picky about where I get my native seeds from. There are a couple of very well known, and if you ask in any native plant growing group on, where's a good place to get seeds, you'll probably get 3 or 4 answers, and those will be the 3 or 4 places that I would shop as well. But again, if you just want to grow some tomatoes, the dollar store seeds will probably be fine. You're not going to get your fancy heirloom varieties, but maybe that's not what you're looking for. So really, there's all kinds of great places, and seed swaps are really a fantastic and very inexpensive and free way to get your seeds. So yeah.
Low risk. Okay, so Andrew, winter sowed and might have watered the seeds the way you said not to. So how does one remedy if they've overwatered, or is there a way to recover from that situation?
So the main reason why you want to dribble it down the sides and not just pour it in the top is because when the water hits the soil, it's going to go kind of like this. And so you risk pushing your seeds out to the side. The good news is it's probably not fatal. There is really an excellent chance they'll be fine. If anything, the seeds will probably migrate towards the outside of the container a little bit. If they've been overwatered, I would just make sure there's drainage in there. As long as you've got good, sufficient drainage, you really can't overwater them because all the excess will just run out.
Okay. All right, I think we're just about done here. Bruce posted a great local resource for garden beds. Deep Roots Project is excellent, local nonprofit. Susie, who's helping to run the seed swap this weekend, reminded me that the seeds the conservatory is selling are Hudson Valley, and they are these square packets and they're super pretty. And that, I think, is the end of our Q&A. So
Okay.
again, Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time to share all of your knowledge with us. And thank you everyone for tuning in this evening. And I am super excited to get my garden going and try some interesting seeds and put
Yeah.
them in jugs outside and not on my dining room table or my kitchen counter. Oh God, the things I've done. So I will send a quick note out to everybody asking for your feedback with some links about the upcoming events that we have so that you're all in tune. And thank you again to Jamie and for joining us this evening. So have a great night.